All right, class, picture this. It's the 1400s, and across the world, empires are rising like never before. Massive, powerful, and ready to change the course of history. From the Ming Dynasty in China to the Ottoman Turks knocking on Europe's door, these empires weren't just flexing military muscle. They were shaping culture, technology, and even influencing the way we live today. And guess what? You are about to become the expert on it all. Grab your notes because Unit 3 is where history gets real. This is Wendy with AP History Help, and this is the AP History Help podcast, where you will learn everything you need to know about taking AP History classes, from skills to content, from historical thinking skills to themes in history. Whether you are taking or thinking about taking AP World History, AP US History, or AP European History, this podcast is for you. Be sure to check out the episode list and show notes to find the topics that you need help with. AP History Help is on TikTok, Instagram, YouTube, and Facebook, where I'm happy to answer your questions. In the first two episodes of this season's podcast, I recapped what we covered in season 1, the skills, the theme, yada, yada. And I also talked about what to expect from season 2. Do be sure to listen to episode 25 for AP World and episode 26 for APUSH. AP Euro kiddos, while your content will come next season, I will tell you that I release at least one video each week on Sundays on my social media channels, TikTok, Instagram, YouTube, that is a specific topic geared to AP European history. And you'll see some interactions in the comments. So essentially proof that I do answer the questions you ask. In addition, you can find the self-paced AP European enrichment courses that I offer on OutSchool in the show notes. Okay, now on to today's episode. Today, students, I'll be teaching you about Unit 3 of AP World History. I've said this before, but I'm going to keep saying it because these episodes this season are content-based. I would strongly recommend taking notes. There are a lot of ways to do that, but my recommendation is to do so thematically. I want you to focus especially on social, political, economic, cultural, and technological events and trends. Your best bet would be to have a copy of my success planner available through Amazon or from me by mail. I'll drop the link in the show notes to my website, which gives you the option to buy it either way. Oh, and you could also go to my TikTok shop and buy it there. Find me at AP History Help. But at the very least, listen with a pen and a piece of paper. There will be lots to learn today. Come on in, students. Let's get this episode of the AP History Help podcast started. First, get your notes out. We've got a lot of thematic focus today, as well as a good deal of causation, contextualization, and changing continuity. Our topic for today is the land-based empires from circa 1450 to 1750. We will look at what these empires were, how they expanded, were administered, and the influence of faith on religion. We will look at what these empires were, how they expanded, were administered, and the influence of faith or religion. And if we have time, compare the various empires and the methods they used to increase their influence. To put Unit 3 in context, you really should go back and listen to episode 25 for the full story. But briefly, leading up to 1450, the Mongol Khanates combined and spread with gunpowder from China, which is going to allow what we call the Gunpowder Empires, the Ottomans, the Safavids, the Mughals, and the Russians, to expand and grow in this time period. These gunpowder empires were highly militaristic, but left great artistic and cultural legacies. They were created to legitimize the rule of their leaders. As these empires grew, they were able to push into weaker areas and in some cases completely replace previous empires. The Qing Empire of China also expanded and prospered, and Europe's growth led to transoceanic connections with the Americas. Varying belief systems led to many disputes between empires in this time as armed trade grew. To help things make sense, I'm going to cover each empire or region in its entirety, so be ready to include how the empire expanded and how they legitimized and maintained or didn't maintain power. Then I'll touch on the different belief systems and how they endured or changed during this time period. Starting in Europe, 1450 signaled the end of the medieval period and the beginning of the early modern period. The plagues had, for all intents and purposes, ended. The 100 Years' War was over, and the printing press was invented. I have to talk about this. You guys, we should spend an entire episode talking about the short and long-term benefits of the printing press. I'm not exaggerating either. So many historians have named it as the most important invention in history. Now, no. I don't want to hear about your smartphone. Because your smartphone, your dumb phones, your computers, your typewriters, none of those happen without the printing press. Think about this. Before the printing press, every book was handwritten. The novels, the Bible, thousands and thousands of words hand copied. Every copy of every book. So needless to say, there weren't very many books around when that's how they are produced. But once you could make many, many copies of any book, pamphlet, or let's even say a list of 95 complaints about the church, those ideas in there started to spread. And there were more books around. Once there are more books, there are more people who are interested in learning how to read them. Before this time, only priests could read. They told people what the Bible and other books said. And now, once more people learned to read, they could learn for themselves. They could make their own conclusions from their own opinion. And this fostered lots of ideas. It wasn't overnight. But about 200 years later, we enter the Age of Enlightenment. Coincidence? I think not. I mean, in 1400s, about 10% of men, not women, could read. By the 1500s, it was 20%. And by 1754, just before we start the Age of Revolutions, literacy rates had risen to 60%. This does not happen without mass-produced books in the printing press. Okay, back on track in Europe. New monarchies began to grow as they explored and established colonies. The leaders centralized power by controlling taxes, centralizing the military, controlling religion, finding some creative way to control the power of the nobility. Specifically in England, King James I followed the divine right of king's principle. To disobey the king was to disobey God. He used bureaucratic elite known as justices of the peace to collect taxes and enforce laws. This weakened the power of the feudal lords and legitimized not just his own power, but the power of the monarchy. However, he did not have absolute power, as Parliament by this time had the power to tax. And shortly thereafter, the English Bill of Rights was instituted later that century, ensuring civil liberties in England, which was a pretty big deal. Meanwhile, over in France, Henry IV and Louis XIV were big on that divine right principle, and they had absolute power, combining all processes of law into one person, the king. Another similarity to Britain is that they had bureaucratic elites who acted as tax farmers, like the justices of the peace in Britain. Louis XIV, he built the Palace of Versailles. Why? To keep his nobles close to him and ensure their loyalty. Versailles was an example of also legitimizing power through architecture, and Louis wasn't the only one. Russia benefited from the use of gunpowder. Ivan IV became the Tsar in 1547, and he wanted to expand Russia east so Russia could have better control over the fur trade. He took control of the last Khanates, which were still held by the Golden Horde descendants. They hired Cossacks or fierce warriors to help the Siberian Khans and took control of the Volga River, which gave them direct access to the Ottoman Empire. And success, Russia would eventually expand to the Pacific. There was this social class called the boyars. They were rich landowners, and Ivan IV hated them because he feared that they were going to overthrow him. So like Louis XIV, he forced the boyar families to live near him, in this case in Moscow. But paranoid much? He also created the Oprichnina, who were a secret police force that was loyal to him and whose job it was to keep an eye on the boyars. In the next century, Peter the Great defeated his sister to lead the boyar-led army called the Streltsky to take control. He eliminated threats and consolidated his rule. He supported the church, but reforms made him lose favor. Peter reorganized Russia into provinces, and this should sound familiar, used bureaucratic elites to collect taxes. He created a Senate, more as advisors than as a legislative body, and similar to, and a little more so than Louis XIV in France, he built the city of St. Petersburg. This became the new capital of Russia. He also kept those boyars close where he could keep an eye on them, and he built the Winter Palace and other buildings on very organized streets. This was a show of his power through architecture, but also to show the world, or at least the rest of Europe, that Russia was European too. In Asia, basically China, the Yuan dynasty, founded by Mongol leader Kublai Khan, was overthrown by the Ming dynasty in 1368. The Ming rulers stabilized power for over 300 years until Portugal and other European nations came in to try and dominate Asian trade routes. The Ming were overthrown by the foreign Manchu people from Manchuria, who established the Qing dynasty, which remained until 1911. Let me stop here to talk about the Ming dynasty and how they kept their power. They started the civil service exams back up and improved education and made a national school system. Essentially, they reestablished the bureaucracy, which had been unused by the Mongols. To legitimize power through architecture, the Ming built the Forbidden City. The emergence of the Qing illustrates gunpowder empires replacing existing empires. The Qing were having some financial problems as we look at the latter part of this century. Emperor Qianlong gave trading rights to some Europeans to make money, but the British wanted more. So Qianlong tells King George he doesn't need British goods and cuts off trade. The usually efficient bureaucracy becomes corrupt and continues to raise taxes. Along comes the White Lotus Society, which institutes reforms to try to reestablish the Ming dynasty. The government suppresses this and kills 100,000 peasants. There were high taxes on the people that had to be paid in silver. They also used a harsh military to control and put down rebellions and maintain their authority. To legitimize their power through art or culture, the Qing had imperial portraits made of the royal family, dressed quite elaborately. There are three empires that we commonly group together as the Gunpowder Empires. They were all able to expand because they had very strong militaries. The empires they were replacing were weak and corrupt, and Europe was busy fighting against itself. To contextualize, the rule of Tamerlane set the stage for the rise of the Gunpowder Empires. He built a government dependent on the military that encouraged the arts and learning. He started in Samarkand, which was up in modern-day Iran, Afghanistan area, and brutally spread through Persia and India. Under his rule, the Ghazi ideal began, which encouraged Islamic warriors for centuries. Ineffective rule eventually ended the rule of Tamerlane, but traditions established by his empire led to these Islamic gunpowder empires. The Ottoman Empire was the largest and most enduring of the great Islamic empires, with a great location for trade. Two leaders that stand out are Mehmed II and Suleiman I. Mehmed was known as the Conqueror. He used siege weapons and gunpowder to overtake the highly fortified city of Constantinople and establish the Ottoman capital there. The city was a nexus of trade with a great location. He went on to expand the lands around the Black Sea and built up the navy to counter Venice, who he forced to pay a yearly tax. And under Suleiman I, the Ottoman Empire reached its peak. They were able to send troops all the way into Christian Europe, that being Vienna, Austria, which freaked Europe out. By 1522, Suleiman's army had conquered the island of Rhodes in the Mediterranean, which had been held by Christian knights. And in the 1550s, they took Tripoli in North Africa. To consolidate control over vast land, they implemented the devshirme system. This was basically staffing the military and government with Christian boys who were stolen and forced to serve. Essentially, they were tribute or a blood tax. They used Christian boys because they were not Muslim. They were taught skills in politics, art, and the military, and received high levels of education and were given jobs as scribes, tax collectors, and diplomats. Janissaries were made of the elite devshirme and formed the highest echelon of the Ottoman military. They were fiercely loyal to the Sultan. Socially, this provided a path for upward mobility. To legitimize their power through finances, the Ottomans practiced tax farming, or a heavy tax on the peasants, not to mention the jizya, which was the tax paid by non-Muslims. Shah Abbas I presided over the Safavid Empire at its height. They imported weapons from Europe and controlled religion, using Shia Islam as a unifying force, and denied legitimacy to any Sunni ruler. Women in the Safavid Empire wore a veil like their Muslim counterparts, but had some freedoms like inheritance and divorce. They would eventually decline due to ineffective leaders, high military spending, and lavish lifestyles. And Sunni rebellions led to a weakened Safavid Empire. The Mughal Empire, and let me emphasize, not the Mongols, the Mughals reached their peak under the leadership of Akbar the Great. He extended the Mughal borders and created fairly administered laws. All, as in anyone of any social class, could appeal to him in lawsuits. And capable men came to serve him after learning of his brilliance. Akbar created a very strong, centralized government with bureaucratic elites called zamindars who were in charge of specific duties like taxation. They were paid by keeping a portion of the taxes that they collected. However, after Akbar left, the Zamindars became corrupt and rich, building armies loyal to them. Last, we look at Japan. Japan was ruled by military leaders called shoguns, but they were in constant conflict with land-holding aristocrats called daimyo, leaving Japan fractured. Each daimyo had an army of samurai loyal only to him. This is very similar to European feudalism, by the way. Access to gunpowder allowed 3 powerful daimyo to take control and consolidate power in Japan. Oda Nobunaga used gunpowder to unify 1/3 of Japan. Toyotomi Hideyoshi followed Nobunaga and expanded until all of Japan was united. And Tokugawa Ieyasu followed him and his successors and ruled Japan into the mid-19th century in what is called the period of Great Peace. This, the Tokugawa shogunate, consolidated power by creating centralized control and ending the feudal system. They divided Japan into 250 Hans, or territories, each controlled by a daimyo. But they forced the daimyo to have 2 homes, one of which was in the capital, making the family stay in the capital so the daimyo would not gain power when they were away, just similar to Russia and France. To further state consolidation, the conservative Tokugawa shogunate moved to limit foreign trade. They basically tried to reduce foreign ideas that could threaten the shogun's power. As we wrap up Unit 3, let's look at how the different belief systems endured or changed during this time period. Religion was an important force in empire building at this time. It acted as a unifier in some places and as a divisive element in others. Religion was so important that some rulers from Henry IV of France converted to Catholicism to solidify their power and ensure their rule. This time is also marked by 2 major religion schisms or split. One in Catholicism, which we'll talk about, and another that happened in Islam. As Europe shifted from feudalism to a centralized government, the corrupt Catholic Church began to face many challenges. Reform movements were unsuccessful. The church moved to France during the Babylonian captivity, which gave French rulers unbalanced power, and the church failed to stop the Black Death. Under the belief that the Catholic Church was corrupt and did not adhere to biblical teaching, there was a split in the church. John Wycliffe believed that priests were not necessary for salvation, and he violated church rules when he translated the Bible into English. Martin Luther, who was a monk in Germany, yes, that's right, just Martin Luther, no King Jr. As a matter of fact, MLK Jr. was born Michael King, and his dad changed their names in honor of the OG Martin Luther. Anyway, Martin Luther disliked indulgences or paying for sin, and simony, which was buying church offices. And he believed in sola fide, or faith alone, for salvation. He wrote a list called the 95 Theses, or complaint about church practices in an effort to reform the church. He also thought that women should have more of a role in religion. Ultimately, he was excommunicated and founded the first non-Catholic form of Christianity, Lutheranism. Others would follow with various reasons for breaking from the church. John Calvin created Calvinism, which would later morph into Puritanism, playing a pretty instrumental role in colonizing America. They believed in plain living with simple buildings and governance by church officials. And most importantly, that the elect, those who had a profound religious experience were predestined to go to heaven. Last Henry VIII, the King of England, wanted to divorce his longtime wife, Catherine of Aragon, who was the daughter of the Spanish monarchs, because she could not bear him a son, and he wanted to marry his young mistress. Bottom line, the Pope refused the request for an annulment, most likely because he didn't want to upset the Spanish king and queen. So Henry started his own church, the Church of England, or the Anglican Church. Later, after punishing many non-believers in the Inquisition, the Catholic Church did meet at the Council of Trent in what would be called the Catholic Counter-Reformation, where they tried to correct some of the worst problems in the church, but doubled down on other practices and banned Protestant books. This deep division would create many a conflict between Catholics and Protestants, including the 30 Years' War, which ended in the Peace of Westphalia that gave more religious freedom to a good deal of Europe. One thing that would happen, as many questioned religious teachings, was a revolution in discovery and investigation into the natural world. In a time of religious schisms and wars, the scientific revolution presented the ideas of thinking based on reason rather than faith. This is called empiricism. The ideas that the world was orderly and rational took hold, eventually leading to the Enlightenment. Galileo, who made a better telescope, and despite being Catholic, publicly taught that the earth was not the center of the universe, which contradicted church doctrine, is considered the father of the scientific revolution. Although Sir Isaac Newton was incredibly influential in math and science, using those two together to show that the world is ordered and rational, and that natural laws applied to the rational and orderly progress of government and society. Really quite revolutionary. And there you have it, oversimplified as much as it was, but I really tried to keep these under 30 minutes. The Protestant Reformation and Scientific Revolution are covered in Unit 2 of AP European History, so check out the link to the self-paced version of that for more details. Anyway, Unit 3 is the first unit that could possibly be a topic for a DBQ, but in the last 6 years, it hasn't been. It is worth 12 to 15% of the exam, with quite a few multiple choice questions being very probable, as there have only been 3 SAQs and 3 LEQs in the last 6 years from this time period. Be sure to know Gunpowder Empires. They always ask about at least one of them. Next episode, which will be released in 2 weeks on October 21st, will be Unit 3 for AP US History, which moves on to the next time period, 1754 to 1800. But just 2 weeks after that, on November 4th, my mom's birthday, happy birthday, Mom, and also the day before Election Day, you'll be ready for Unit 4 of AP World History. Still the period covering 1450 to 1750, transoceanic interconnections. We are going to see what happens when we cross the Atlantic and when those connections happen. If you haven't already done so, get that Student Success Planner from my website, from Amazon, or from the TikTok shop. Head on over to my website, aphistoryhelp.com, where you will see a bunch of ways to contact me. Feel free to do so with any questions that you might have. I'm here to help you. And that will do it for this episode. Don't forget to come back to Wendy for AP History Help. And this episode of the AP History Help podcast is now history.